Thank you so much for hopping on with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you came a few weeks ago and played for our SAS concerts, right?
Yes.
And can you remind me what you guys performed?
So, my husband Edward is a pianist and I'm a singer. And we did a program of songs centered on a large song cycle by Lyra Auerbach, who's a Russian American composer. She's a pianist herself. And the set of songs is called The Songs of No Return, and they're based on the life of Sylvia Plath. They're in three large movements. The first one is a set of six shorter songs that originally were setting text from Sylvia Plath's diaries, but right before the premiere of the songs in 2007, Auerbach was contacted by the Plath estate telling her, you can't use these texts after all. She had already set them. She had already given the music to the soprano who was premiering the songs. And she was like, well, I can't rewrite the pieces. So she rewrote the words. So the text is not Plath, but you can still tell there are a lot of aspects that are influenced by the kind of life experiences of Sylvia Plath. And it works surprisingly well. I was really shocked when I worked on the songs with her last spring while I was still doing my graduate work at Bard. And she told me that during a coaching, and I was shocked because it really works. It packs a punch. then the middle movement is a setting of Sylvia Plath's poem Lady Lazarus, which she wrote shortly before she committed suicide. She was living in London. She had separated from her husband, and she wrote a couple months of her life, and this was one of those poems. And then the final movement is a setting of a poem by Maxine Kumin called So She Didn't Kill Herself That Afternoon, The Revisionist Stream.
That got me.
That is not, as far as I know, that poem was not written with Sylvia Plath in mind in particular, but it's somebody recalling a friend of theirs who, in fact, committed suicide, but imagining if they'd had access to what we would probably consider modern day coping mechanisms. So there are lines in it like, she said she had begun to practice yoga, take piano lessons, she started writing again, she's cooking and translating Russian and watching Julia Child. So it's all of these things that we sort of associate with, I guess you'd say, mainstream coping mechanisms for depression or things of that nature. And that is, but in the context coming right after Lady Lazarus, it feels very much as if it's directly responding to Sylvia Plath's situation.
Okay.
So, sorry.
So many questions now. Okay, wait, hold on, back up. Who is Sylvia Plath?
Sylvia Plath is an American poet who lived, I should have her dates here, and I don't, but she committed suicide, I want to say, in 1963. I'm pretty sure that's right. She wrote The Bell Jar, which is her only novel per se, but mainly she was a poet, but that novel deals with her early bouts of depression as a 20-year-old. I think that's right, I think she was 20. She was institutionalized for a period of about 6 months after trying to commit suicide by overdosing on a bunch of pills that she stole from her mother. And she was found and saved, but then went through electroshock therapy and was in a mental institution for, I think, about 6 months.
Wow.
So that is, I don't know if you remember from the Lady Lazarus movement, she talks about, in the very beginning, she says, I've done it again, 1 year of every 10 I manage it. This idea that every 10 years she tries to kill herself. And I think I am not a Sylvia Plath expert. I've read the Bell Jar and I've read some of her poetry, and I'm not great with, exact facts on her. So if anybody out there knows all of this better than I do, sorry if I'm messing it up. But I believe the reference that she makes to the time that what she considers her suicide attempt as a child, I think is actually, could be totally wrong about this, but I think it actually refers more to her father's death. That her father died when she was 9 or 10 years old. And I think that to her was almost became kind of a death for herself too. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I don't think she tried to commit suicide as a little girl.
Okay.
But then she in fact killed herself when she was 30. So this poem is written almost presciently, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know how premeditated her suicide was. I'm not sure if anybody does. But okay, now I totally lost track of what you were asking who Sylvia Plath was.
So deep. Like this. Okay, we often think of classical music as like fun and happy and like Mozart and like flirty. Maybe people don't actually think of classical music as happy. I do. But this is so different than what we consider mainstream classical music.
Yeah.
Like, why did you pick this?
Well, it was something that I mentioned. I had worked on these pieces while I was doing my master's degree last year, and I sang the first set of them, the first movement, for a concert of New York premieres that the students at Bard did. And working on them was really, they're very challenging musically and vocally. And there was something about the process of how much of myself and how much energy I had to put into them physically and emotionally, that even though when I first started looking at them, they're not the kind of music that you listen to and you go, oh, that's really pretty.
Yeah.
And I want to listen to the pretty melody. But once I had lived with them for a while, there was something really cathartic and powerful about performing them. And I knew once I had done that first set in performance that I wanted to work on the entire set. And I was thinking a lot about a couple things, both the fact that as classical musicians, we're often told that we bring, beauty and comfort, and classical music is so serious, and but serious in the sense of like austere, I think, is what people view it as a lot of time, and far away from everyday existence. It's easily put on a pedestal, and I think especially as a singer, it's very easy for people to look at you and say, oh, what you do is so beautiful, and then the idea of its beauty becomes shallow in a way, and sometimes that can make the vocation of being a singer feel a little bit petty, like that you're just there to be this pretty sound. And so I was thinking a lot about how, as an artist, of course it can be really rewarding and wonderful, and it's something that's kept me going throughout 6 years of conservatory and all the years of practicing everything, that you can bring joy and beauty and peace to people, that's something music can do, is amazing. But sometimes that starts to feel really pointless from the artist's perspective.
Yeah.
And so I really was thinking about, what can I do as a singer, as an artist, in this day and age that's more than that. That's more than just pretty songs.
Yeah.
And this, the thematic material of this, the way it deals with depression and mental illness and suicide, is something that I think our society as a whole is becoming more aware of and better at dealing with, but it's still not as good as it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I've never been diagnosed with any kind of mental illness or anything like that. But I've definitely had times where I've been depressed to some degree. And as a musician, I think many of us experience periods of really severe self-doubt and self-sabotage, where all those questions about, you know, why am I doing this? Am I just this pretty thing? Can just spiral into a really bad place. And also, I think abuse within the music world is really normalized in a really, really screwed up way. And I don't mean even specifically like physical abuse, but that obviously is out there. Like all the stories that have been surfacing over the years of people who, you know, get sexually abused because, oh, you're not going to get this if you don't, blah. Even aside from that, just like the emotional abuse that happens within lessons, within like competition between peers, that's so like fed by a conservatory environment. And I feel like the programs I was in were generally really supportive and good environments generally, but still, even in those places, how things can happen like accidentally. And I'm sure, like, I have no doubt that I've been on the guilty end of that too. You know, it's just because we're so like caught up in our little tunnel vision.
Yeah.
But I definitely lost my train of thought again. Where I started with that. Why the issue of mental illness is important in music.
And you're also saying that this music, even though you might not have diagnosed depression or anxiety or whatever, it's still relatable in a sense, because as musicians, we go through a lot of these things between this kind of the emotional abuse that can go on, you know, with our peers, with our mentors, and honestly, even within our own minds.
Yep.
A lot of time we emotionally abuse ourselves as musicians.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy. So, I mean, honestly, I was in tears at your performance. I actually cried. I was sitting there. I think it was after the one where it's like, she didn't kill herself today. I think it was after that song. I was just like, and also what you're saying about all the, oh, she picked up yoga, learned to play piano. Like, we tell people like, oh, well, that'll fix all your problems. Just do that. And that's the reality.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you bringing that to light with your music. I think everyone in the audience that day really understood that point.
Yeah. And one of the other thoughts that I had with this was, I mean, and it kind of felt like a two-edged sword for a while of like, okay, well, if I haven't necessarily dealt with these kind of problems, do I have a right to speak about them? But on the other hand, I think we can't always put it on the people who are suffering these kind of things to advocate for themselves. That's not fair. Like, they're already dealing with something that's really challenging, to put it lightly. And so without trying to kind of appropriate or romanticize mental illness, to say that those of us who maybe don't struggle with it, or don't struggle with it as much, could be doing more to remind people that they need to be looking out for each other. They need to be aware of people they know who are struggling with this. And yeah.
So you had some other pieces on the program too as well, right?
Yes. So that set is probably, I don't know, like 30, 40 minutes long by itself. But we added a couple bookends in a way. One of them is a piece, what we started with was that piece by Wes York, who's also an American composer. And the cool thing about the program for us, kind of as a side note, is that we've actually met or worked with all of the composers that we have
So
on the program. So Wes York is probably, what is he, in his 70s maybe? He lives in Connecticut, and I came across his music in a really funny way, which was that I was looking specifically for composers who had set the poetry of Denise Levertov. Not sure if you're familiar with her.
Who is she? Give me a
Also
little.
an American poet, similar time period to Sylvia Plath, lived much longer, and also was an expat to England. Oh, am I getting that right? No, she was the other way around. She was born in England and she moved to the US, and she's considered an American poet, even though she was born in England. So, and she's just a poet that I've been really interested in for a while. And Wes York was one of the only people that came up in a Google search of people who had set for poetry. And so I ended up doing a chamber piece of his that's for voice, marimba, and violin on my degree recital last spring. And he came to the concert. He and his husband drove up and came to the concert just, for the weekend.
Where does he live? In New York or?
No, he lives in Connecticut. Yeah.
And he came. That's amazing.
Yeah. I emailed him to get the music from him because I couldn't find the score anywhere. And he sent me a handwritten copy of the score and said, I really need to have this engraved. So let me get my guy who does my engravings and I'll make new copies for you. So he had it reprinted for me and charged me, I don't know, $15 for the whole score.
What?
And then, asked when my concert was going to be and made a trip. And
wow.
And also, okay, so this is a total side note from that, but he was so sweet. I asked him to come up and say a few words before we did the performance, and he really only said a couple things because he said, well, this isn't about me though. This is your thing, and I'm just so glad you're doing my music. And then afterwards, he was there in this amazing, tweed bow tie and stuff. And he said to me afterwards, I know it's not really that big of a deal, but I do feel as if one should always dress up for a concert because it's like a little miracle that this music is happening. And so I like to dress up for any occasion when there's a performance.
It's a little miracle.
Yeah.
I gotta stop. That's so sweet.
So he has a few songs that are settings of Lakota Indian texts, and I'd asked him about the music for them, and there was only one that he said he was okay with having performed without revising it first, and he's been in the midst of a whole bunch of other projects, so he didn't have time to revise the others. But that was the first piece that we did on the Songs of No Return program. And it's called My Heart is Different.
Yeah.
Which, even though it's not anything that was specifically written to pertain to the topic of mental illness or depression, there was something about both the aesthetic of the piece musically and also the text, which is really short, and I don't have it in front of me, but can I remember it? My heart is different. I have shown it. A wind comes from the north. There's something else. I'm missing something.
I just remember it being really relatable. I remember hearing it thinking, yes, my heart is different.
Right. And it's like we all have that kind of feeling because we all are different. What?
Exactly.
But also, and I don't know if in Native American tradition this is the case, but the North Wind reference is, at least from things that I grew up reading, a lot of times the North Wind is considered to be almost a euphemism for death. So if you're behind the North Wind, you are in heaven.
Oh.
Because you're no longer in danger of the cold blasts of the North Wind.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if that's part of the idea originally, but I feel as if there's a good chance because it's a very folkloric sort of concept. And so that also, the speaker in that text saying, you know, the North Wind has come to get me, feels like their desire, that they are desiring to be taken away from the land of the living.
Yeah.
But it's definitely in a very peaceful way, as opposed to the aggressive quality of the Auerbach songs.
Yeah.
And then Edward played the piano solo piece called Open Me or Readdress Me, which is written by our friend Whitney George. She's a composer in New York City. And that one connects because, well, we needed a breather after the Auerbach because it's so much to handle, both from a performer's point of view and from an audience perspective, because it's one of those pieces that you listen to, having been on both ends of it, having performed some of it and listened to some of it when I first worked on them, that once it's over, you kind of feel a little bit hollowed out. You need time to process. And so it was nice to have a little respite of the piano piece in there. And that also is based on a text that was written by Sylvia Plath's husband, Ted Hughes. And he published, it might have not even been published until after he died, I can't remember. But he has a collection of poetry called Birthday Letters that were mostly addressed to Sylvia. Oh. And that text was from one of those poems. And okay, clarification. So there's no actual sung text. It's just a piano piece. But in the score, there are sentences from the poem written in certain spots. And that, I don't know, their whole relationship is something that I don't know a ton about. I'm pretty sure he was abusive. She left him shortly before she killed herself. They were separated. She had taken their kids and moved out. I don't know the whole story. I think there may have been some things that went both ways. But then the weird, freaky coincidence is that he married somebody else after she died, and that woman also committed suicide. So, I don't know. I think there might have been some complicated problems in that whole... Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. But he was also a poet and a writer.
It's so cool that your entire program is intertwined between, the different poets and topics and things like that. It was very well thought out, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, and then the last piece that we did was by Annika Sokolovsky, who is somebody else that I met through this program we did at Bard last year. Somebody else in my class sang Loves Don't Go, which is the piece we ended the program with. And that is a text by Molly Moses. And she's not somebody I was familiar with beyond this piece.
Okay.
But that piece we put at the end because it feels sort of like not exactly a eulogy, but I guess epitaph would be a better word for it. And also, it's definitely from the perspective of somebody who has suffered the loss,
Mm.
again, wouldn't specifically be connected to suicide or depression, but it's also, the text is treated in a really interesting way where it says short text, but it's set in fragments. It's not set in order. And while we were working on the piece and in the context of the rest of the program, it kind of hit me that that's how a lot of us express ourselves when we are grieving. That it's hard to put together a coherent sentence, hard to start at the beginning and end at the end of a thought. Things get cut up and come out the wrong way. And I don't know if that was a thought out choice on the part of the composer, or if, I don't know, but that I thought was even formally a really powerful statement by the piece. But that text is basically saying loves don't go away. They're always here. They might have new loves that come to exist on top of them, but they are always going to stay with us.
Wow. I feel like I just listened to the whole program again.
I know, I kind of feel like I just said
so much. Okay, what is it like working with the composers? Like you said, you got to either meet or work with all of these composers. Like, what is that like for people who don't get to do that?
So Wes, that was the story. That was how I got to meet him. So that's the first piece. And that was really wonderful. I guess I sort of worked with him by email a little bit, because I had contact with him when I had questions about the score. I could ask him, is this how you want this to be? And that was really great because his scores are pretty sparse, but also involved. With the Auerbach, I got to have one coaching with her before the performance of the first section that I did last year, because she'd been on tour right up until when we had our concerts. But that was really cool. She was very fun to work with. She's a really dramatic person.
Love it.
I haven't listened to a lot of her piano playing, but Edward said that she plays the piano that way too. She's just really got a lot of, I don't think it's not like performative dramatic flair, but she's into it in a very mighty way. But one of the things that was really freeing, I guess, about working on these pieces with her was, and I have it written on my score that I was using when I worked with her, she said, be an actor who sings. I don't want you to be a singer. She definitely pulled the, okay, stop being so accurate line.
Yeah.
Her music requires, you have to learn it really accurately. Because there are a lot of wild intervals and long phrases and awkward entrances. But that was definitely, knowing that was what she was going for was so helpful in continuing to work on the piece and performing it, that what she wanted was you to really be that character. And I think I ever since I started working on these, I thought it would be really cool to stage them, but I also don't know if that would actually make it tacky. But there's so much descriptive of the character's surroundings, especially in the diary entry ones, the ones that were originally supposed to be class journals. But
I feel like that's asking a lot for the performer to become that particular character.
Yes.
Like, what do you have to do to get there?
Well, I mean, the words are the vehicle for that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Not sure how else to say it.
Does it take a lot out of you performing it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially, there's a lot in that first movement that's memory related or stream of consciousness in a way. So that first movement starts out with her saying, I am only a shadow of my words. But it's not even, you say I am only a shadow of my words. So it's almost as if she's written in the thought process for you. Also, nerdy Sylvia Plath moment. There's a really famous line of Sylvia Plath that's I am. And there's several spots in the lyrics that Lyra Auerbach wrote where she kind of sneakily fits that in, including this very beginning. I am only a shadow of my words. I can only assume that was conscious on her part, but also it's a pretty standard verb subject combo, so I don't know. But
I think it was intentional, especially if she was already trying to set Sylvia Plath's lyric or text into it. So
but
and also worked with sorry, go ahead.
No, I was backtracking in my mind. I had just remembered that earlier when we were talking about being a musician and self-doubt and self-sabotage, the very beginning of this piece, I feel as if is something that's so relevant to that feeling of I'm only a shadow of my words for her being a writer. But for us as musicians, how often does it feel as if you're just this non-entity vehicle for something else, which can be really beautiful and liberating, but can also make you feel pointless.
Yeah. I know a lot of musicians go through that why phase. Like, why am I even doing this? Like, what good is this actually doing? Like, am I worth it? Am I good enough for this? Like, we all go through those kinds of.
Yeah. And then it also is another level of that is that if there's nobody listening to my music, what is my music worth?
Yeah.
Which I think we're all dealing with right now.
Ooh. Oh yeah, especially with Corona. Like I feel like, am I even a musician anymore? Like, I don't know.
Right.
And whew. Yeah. We shouldn't get too deep into that.
No, we shouldn't.
Let's be prepared for this right now. Okay, so but you also, the prepared piano piece was with someone from Bard or something?
No, the prepared piano piece is by our friend Whitney George. She's a composer in New York City.
Okay.
She wrote an opera that we both were part of last summer.
Okay.
Called Princess Malène, and it's based on a Metterlink play.
Okay.
That's based on an obscure fairy tale. It's very strange. It was a really cool opera. I think it's her only full-length opera for stage, and I covered the title role and I was in the chorus for it, and that was and Edward played piano for all the rehearsals and in the orchestra pit for the performances. So that was how we got to know her. And then that piece, the piano piece, was originally written for a percussionist, and Edward rearranged it with her blessing to work on prepared piano.
That takes skill. I don't know. It was amazing how he did it, and he had like nuts and bolts and stuff like that. Like
painter's tape, nuts and bolts, and maybe that was it for that one.
I don't remember.
He's definitely used sticky tack in prepared piano pieces and erasers.
All sorts of weird stuff. But it's cool because it really gives that kind of percussive, added percussive aspects of what it would originally have had. So it's really
her
he was creative enough to figure that out.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
The original percussion score even had not all normal percussion instruments. I think it was, I want to say vibraphone, glockenspiel, and found metals. So I'm not sure exactly what those were, but like pipes.
Yeah.
Of, I don't know.
It ended up being really cool either way.
It was really cool.
Yeah, so that's cool. It's cool you have all these connections with different people and you're able to come together and create art like this.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these experiences and going really deep into places we don't normally go in classical music. And you guys gave a very effective performance. Like I said, I cried. And everyone left and felt like, wow, like they really got something out of that. So thank you guys so much for performing and for letting me pick your brain today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us perform. And